Michael Ostrolenk here with my co-host, Deirdre Hackleman. We are talking to Michael Strong. Welcome back, Michael. It's been perhaps a decade since you and I had our last conversation. I believe it was titled Mises Meets Maslow. So it's great to see you and great to have you back on the air with us. And I'm excited to have my co-host back with me today.
Yeah, excited to be here.
Delighted to be here. Great to be here, Michael. Great to see you, Deirdre.
So actually, I'm going to let ladies first.
Yeah, always.
Yep.
So yeah, this is the first time we're talking here, Michael, but I've done a little bit of research into you, but I thought it might be nice if you could start out by talking about your personal journey, because you have kind of a eclectic, windy past, so I thought that would be a good place to start.
Absolutely. So, I love dialogue. In high school, I had a high school teacher where we simply read and discussed Plato, Nietzsche, Buber, and so forth. I found it to be a delight, and regular school was boring. So that set me on a path where I, for a time, went to Harvard, but I was bored by having famous people lecture at me. So I then went to St. John's for 4 years of Socratic discussion on the great books. That led to graduate school, where I was working in Chicago public schools, training teachers to lead Socratic dialogue, with no formal training as an educator myself. That led to a full-time job training teachers in Alaska on Socratic dialogue, and we were on soft money. When the money ran out, parents came to me and asked if I would start a school, and that was how I became an accidental educational entrepreneur. I've spent most of the last 35 years creating small, private, one charter school focused on, I would say, cultivating a variety of virtues in young people, including intellectual virtues, most recently entrepreneurial virtues. In between the school creation, I met John Mackey, CEO of Whole Foods, and he and I both believed in entrepreneurship as a way to solve global problems. So we created Flow, which was dedicated to using entrepreneurship to solve global problems. And within that, Flow spun off Conscious Capitalism, Peace Through Commerce, Accelerating Women Entrepreneurs, Radical Social Entrepreneurs, and the Startup Cities Institute. So, eclectic career as both an education entrepreneur as well as a nonprofit entrepreneur, so to speak. So I'll pause there and figure out where we want to go.
Sure. I guess you started out kind of laying out your pathway to Socratic dialogue and using that as an educational tool. Can you talk about the importance of that? And maybe I've heard you describe it as a game, which I loved the way you talk about it, and a game that a lot of us maybe aren't taught how to play. So could you expand on that a little bit?
Absolutely. Well, for me, I love thinking about ideas, and I think that's what makes learning interesting. And so my goal as a Socratic leader is to create a culture in which it's normal to think and talk about ideas, and be respectful about it. So very often when I've gone into the most anti-intellectual classrooms and the roughest inner city neighborhoods, and trained students. Person A speaks, person B speaks, and person A responds, just like we're doing here. But once one has these norms in place and then connects it to reading articles, and reading and thinking about ideas in classic texts or contemporary texts, then one has the tools to really explore the world of ideas. And I think we adults expect most of the listeners of this show love thinking about ideas. It's the fun at the end of the rainbow. So, most of school is incredibly boring. And why not introduce something to the fun part early on, which is very much what I do.
Okay, yeah. And how, I guess I'm interested in also because, Socratic dialogue tends to be abstract. I mean, you're talking about ideas, and a lot of us maybe aren't as good at going abstract because we're used to living in a very concrete world and doing concrete things. So what do you think happens to the brain when you develop that? Like, how does that help you in life in general?
Oh, no, that's a great question. And by the way, I think of you as the paleo educator, and I've got a whole paleo spin on this. So I'm going to start connecting it to the paleo theme,
Excellent.
which, right now is known as diet. But, so for instance, we've spent much of the fall this year talking about heroism and courage. And the way all of us understand concepts is by means of example, example, example. So, is this a hero or is that a hero? You know, and if you talk about very specific cases, very often students will care about whether or not they think, you know, somebody they respect is a hero. In the text, we've been talking about Achilles. Is Achilles a hero or not? Well, clearly he's a flawed hero. Other people, of course, point out that these so-called heroes are basically raping women all the time. Does that make them a hero, especially in light of the greater awareness of this sort of non-consensual sexual harassment issue? So even though we're talking about ancient classic texts and we're talking about abstract ideas, we're also talking about very visceral, right now, you know, are you a hero? Is my dad a hero? Is my mom a hero? You know, is you know, somebody who does something good but also does something really bad, can they still be a hero? A lot of students in our society are really anti-heroic at this point. They don't believe there are heroes. That's an interesting idea as well. So by means of constantly connecting these fundamental ideas to very concrete, real-world, contemporary issues, it's no longer abstract. It's basically, what do you stand for and why do you stand for that? And, you know, if you think that, you know, a particular celebrity is a hero, and I think that celebrity is a real jerk, you know, we've got something to talk about. And often it's very much at that visceral level. Just a little bit into the paleo thing, I believe, quite aside from paleo diet, we all grew up in evolutionary tribes of 150 where heroism was real. You know, the individuals who were, you know, courageous and brave and fought battles and hunted successfully were important to the tribe. And I think one of the reasons our children, our young people, are starved for, call it social, emotional, moral, spiritual vitamins, is that we don't have a culture of heroism and courage. You know, it's back there in subtle, attenuated ways, but as much as I love, you know, animal protein and vegetables, I think the need for heroism and courage and honor is absolutely just as essential to human well-being. And we talk about that in a very real, direct, immediate way.
Let me ask you a question, because I heard you talk about Achilles as a hero, but he also did things that were acceptable back in the day in terms of the time and his culture, which reflectively from now backwards would not be acceptable today. How do you explain to your students that the consciousness they have now is not the consciousness that the characters would have had at the time that they existed, whether fictional or real human beings?
So first, as much as possible, I don't explain anything to them. I want them to figure it out. And of course, you know, they all have that kind of awareness. But of course, that very fact, you know, they look at it. So one of the things they look at is, are there examples in the Iliad where the women are treated with agency? So insofar as women are simply slaves in the Iliad, or chattel without any agency, then there are, you know, clearly, wow, what a different world. And yet there are little points at which women are treated with agency and, you know, some tenderness as well. And then, of course, there's the goddess Athena, who is just powerful and amazing. So already you have these ambiguities, and much of what they begin talking about is, you know, is it different if you see some glimpses of what we now regard as important moral traits, such as respecting the agency of all other human beings and acting humanely to all other human beings? And that immediately, you know, this is what's interesting, is I think most students find classic texts really boring in school. We had one kid who said he read the Odyssey or the Iliad last year and was bored silly, but that's because they were teaching it to him. I don't want to teach anything to anybody. I want to put something interesting in front of you and ask you what you think and why you think it, what you stand for. Again, in old Athens, Socrates and the Agora would walk up to people and what is courage? You know, what is piety? What is justice? What is virtue? And I think the more young people think and talk about this, it gives them a sense of personal identity. I often describe the curriculum at my schools as the conscious development of personal identity. And a lot of people are like, well, what about U.S. history? Well, you know, if you talk about, you know, the Federalist Papers and whether you think that James Madison was making a good argument or how we might limit the degree to which factions can undermine the civility of our society. And then of course our democracy today is so ripped to shreds with factions. Did Madison mess up, or was Madison doing the right thing? Are we doing pretty well? Again, it's all about what do you think right now today. We may use the ideas of Madison or Homer or somebody else to give us an intellectual framework with which to relate to contemporary events. But I'm always putting them on the spot and encouraging them to put each other on the spot with respect to interpersonal relationships. Are you acting honorable vis-a-vis your friends? If you say you're a friend to Deirdre, but then you go and talk behind her back, is that heroic? Is that courageous? Probably not. But if so, defend it. Tell us why. Maybe there are some circumstances in which it is appropriate to do that. Great. Tell us why. So as much as possible, I put them in a situation where we're talking about morally important things. Just to go back to the issue of abstraction, because we evolved in tribes where issues such as love, trust, betrayal, justice, truth were really important. Every one of us has a very finely tuned sensibility. If ever, I give you an example, if ever I'm with a group of students who is really disengaged from school, totally negative, cynical, jaded attitude, I might ask somebody, do you care if your best friend betrays you? Well, sooner or later, I can get fire on the table when we talk about best friends betraying each other. It's human nature, big time. And that can lead to any kind of discussion I want.
No, that's fascinating. I love your term of paleo-education. I don't know if you're familiar with Jordan Peterson at all. I hope so. But I kind of describe him to people as having developed a paleo metaphysic. So he kind of has this, he teaches heroism, and he uses, heroes as archetypes to describe how to develop the self. And it's very concrete, they're abstract stories, but they have such a concrete application, and it doesn't matter if they're flawed. That's the whole point, is that they are flawed, but you can still be a hero, and have sense of self and all that stuff. Have you listened to him much, or?
I have a little bit. Clearly I can't keep up with the ongoing stream of content and controversies, but certainly issues such as I think that we have cut ourselves off. Modern society has cut ourselves off from these key, really, conversations. And one problem with traditional academics at both K-12 and university level is there is this notion that it's this disengaged, disembodied content that is not connected to who we are as agents, as within a society. And I feel as if we don't encourage and support the development of moral agency among young people. And then, of course, we wonder why they're merely interested in consumerism or entertainment or hedonism or whatever. If you from the
Sorry, we lost you for a minute there.
Yeah, you checked out for a second. Can you just repeat the last couple 10 seconds or so? After moral agency.
If we take away the responsibility to engage in moral conversation with each other, we've cut them off of an essential aspect of their humanity. And our schools and our society do not encourage real face-to-face conversations about moral agency. I think even a lot of churches don't anymore. I think, politics and churches are kind of top-down and distant. School is sterile and academic. The therapeutic world is in many ways constructive, but it also doesn't necessarily encourage moral agency. Families no longer do. And it doesn't mean we need to be dogmatic and black and white. The most interesting questions, and I think the development of wisdom is associated with challenging cases of moral agency and responsibility. None of us even expect each other to be accountable for anything. In a way, we no longer relate to each other as human beings. So I see the ongoing serious conversation about who we are vis-a-vis each other as really, again, a social vitamin, a vitamin for the soul, if you will, that is absent from the intellectual and spiritual diets of almost all adolescents in the the U.S. today.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. It's almost like an atrophying, so it's moral exercise to have to work this stuff out between real people instead of having it legislated for you so that you're just obeying a law that you don't know why. So when you're put in a situation, you have no ground to stand on. This might be a good segue into what would you call a society where we could exercise our morality. So I was going to ask you about the free cities and let you say a little bit about that.
No, that's a great idea. Well, I think we don't have constructive moral conversations. We've become so diverse with respect to political, social, religious allegiances, and so forth. Just a quick anecdote, and I'll get into the free city piece. When I was doing Socratic dialogue in Alaska, a parent in public schools, a parent came up to me and she said, "Your questions cause confusion. Confusion comes from Satan. Therefore, what you're doing is satanic, and I'm going to get you out of the public schools." And she did. 5 activist parents can, kill any program in a public school. And I take that as a microcosm of, look, there are religious conservatives and religious fundamentalists in some cases. They're not the same always, but who, don't want their children exposed to sex ed or evolutionary theory or whatever. I say instead of top-down, one-size-fits-all, one set of textbooks for the U.S. or even Texas or whatever, let's go off and create our own jurisdictions. I'm radically in favor of let San Francisco go where they want to go, let Alabama go where they want to go. And so the Free City Project, which is very much new legal jurisdictions around the world, was actually talking to somebody on the Isle of Guernsey today. I was talking to somebody in the Karen tribe in what used to be Burma last night. I'm still talking to partners in Honduras on a project I've been working on there for years. My wife is jurisdictions there. The idea is as much as possible to create higher quality legal systems for the creation of prosperity. So in the first instance, this is economic development. We want to create better law and governance so poor countries can become prosperous and middle class. But along with that, I want to include the opportunity for coherent moral communities to develop based on different belief systems. I'm very much a secular intellectual myself, but I'm fully willing to let Mormons create their community, Baptists create their community, Muslims create their community. As long as no one is initiating violence, I say let's live and let live and create all these coherent cultures, and some of which will be secular and intellectual and pluralistic, and others may be much more traditional. But rather than force, I basically see something like the federal U.S. government as imposing by force through their colonial powers norms on all sorts of subcultures that are very resentful. I think it's ridiculous. Colonialism is bad. We need to quit imposing by force on norms that people don't want to be forced to do. It's simple.
Yeah, completely agree. Since a lot of us don't live in a free city, what to someone who's got little kids that are trying to get into maybe a structured education that's not at home anymore, what would be your advice to a young parent or parent of a young child now as to what they should do for the best of their kid?
Oh, that's a great question. So first of all, I think we need a lot more schools. I used to think my schools were necessarily best for all kids. Now I realize I can imagine family with 10 children sending 10 children to 10 different schools. We need a lot more different options. So first of all, I'm very favor in school choice, and the least regulated school choice, the better. I'm certainly a fan of unschooling and homeschooling. And it's interesting now those two variants are relatively well known. I actually have a website, a media channel called Original Path on the Maven. So it's themaven.net/Original Path, which is designed for teens who want to be free from traditional schooling. Because one of the things we're finding is that very often, I know enough about education, I can let my kids hang out at home and know they'll get a great education. I'm very proud of the fact my son dropped out of high school and spent his senior year, or what would have been his senior year, studying classical guitar and mathematics. But a lot of kids don't have that kind of support in various ways. not only moral, emotional support, but also intellectually. I know, hey, he's doing extra math for a year, pretty good thing. So the Media Channel Original Path is designed for teens who are looking for that kind of extra support. So to kind of high level, what can parents do? I certainly support looking for schooling options, alternative schooling options, homeschooling, unschooling. I also want to emphasize that I see a continuum between school and not school. A lot of people think either I'm going to enroll my kid in a school or I'm going to homeschool them. But in Austin in particular, where I am, there is a one-day-a-week school where kids only go to school one day a week and then they are homeschooled. There are all sorts of structured math and writing and various a la carte items. I actually helped create another school in Austin where you could either enroll full-time or a la carte. I've known parents who've been very aggressive with public schools and told them, my kid goes till noon because they like the offerings till noon, and then they're going off the rest of the day. Initially, the public school says, oh, you can't do that. And then they realize, oh, we still get the full per-pupil expenditure from the state, and we don't have to service the kid the second half of the day, and this parent is very aggressive. So I would say become an aggressive advocate of your kid and do whatever it takes to homeschool, unschool, start a school, support school choice. I do believe that there's an epidemic, again, I focused on secondary, an epidemic of mental health issues, behavioral disorders, substance abuse, and it's caused by the mismatch between the human soul and schooling. And I think all parents need to take the desire for more healthy educational options, especially at secondary, as crisis level. I actually wrote an article on our public schools causing an epidemic of mental illness, because I think the mismatch is becoming so severe by all sorts of metrics. It's getting worse year by year, decade by decade. And sadly, a lot of I see kids once they've had a crisis, sometimes fairly severe, and then I help the parents, create a highly personalized, warm virtue culture experience for their kids, unlike the, sterile, meaningless sort of situation many children find themselves in.
Yeah.
Wow. We're going to definitely have links to the various things you just mentioned. I think those are really important. Awesome. Great resources for people to learn more. So we are transitioning from the industrial age to post-industrial age, the information age. Let's go from the personal level of you working with individual children and parents to kind of a social cultural level. What do you see as both where we are going now in terms of transitioning and some of the old structures no longer, if they ever did, supporting human health and well-being and optimal functioning, and some of the alternatives that are emerging, not just in education, but other areas of human life and activity? Can you talk a little bit about that at kind of the socio-cultural, technological level?
Sure. And I'll start with the education just because it's the core, but then I'll go beyond that. So first of all, I'm a great fan of tools like Khan Academy, massive open online courses. All Schools is a great software platform that's coming on board. So I am a great enthusiast for the technology and ed tech devices that are coming forth. But what people don't realize is the ed tech only gets you so far. I've read something like only 3% of students finish most college level MOOC courses. And the reason for that is we need human interaction. So I see education going forward and then beyond education to life as we're going to have a society that's optimized where technology can optimize that side, but we need to optimize the human side. And actually my interest in both freedom of education as well as freedom of community creation. You could describe the let the Mormons do what they want to do, the Baptists do what they want to do, and so forth as freedom of community creation as an essential human technology complement to the rampant development. Regular technology, electronic technology is going incredibly quickly. So one of the great appeals to my schools for many parents is that we have at least 3 hours, and often 4 or 5 hours a day that are pure human-to-human interaction. Then they can go home and do the linear math on Khan Academy. They can watch fantastic history videos to support the history curriculum. It's not a matter of being anti-technology. It's instead of having a really boring lecture in the classroom, let's have interaction. I think people interacting with each other is the great joy of life. Ideally, we should be liberating, technology should be liberating us from all of the things we don't like, so we can do more of the things that are both healthy for us and we do like. I'm excited about self-driving cars because I envision even better, conversations and interactions. You can really enjoy yourself if the car is doing the driving, and all of you in the car can really simply enjoy yourself. I'm a big fan of the experience economy. So I see, I'll go into the Whole Foods. A lot of times people think Whole Foods, organic groceries. Forget the organic groceries. For me, it's a beautiful experience. One of the ways in which entrepreneurs create value is entrepreneurs look at what sucks and how to fix it. The example I like is, once upon a time we all woke to alarm clocks that went, that's horrible. Then they had radio clocks, radio alarms, where at least you have the music, your favorite radio station, and then your CD. Now you can get alarm clocks that wake you up with the smell of bacon, or a gradual dark to light, or, in one case, there's actually an alarm clock that will run away from you, so if you hit the snooze button too often, you have to jump out of bed and run around the room. But
That's awesome.
Entrepreneurs solve problems, and human unhappiness and misery is arguably one of our biggest problems, certainly once we're in a developed world. So then you get into things like, let's make shopping and groceries a beautiful experience at Whole Foods rather than an ugly fluorescent lights experience at Safeway. Dentist office, I'm still frustrated. Why is it not fun to go to the dentist? That may sound insane, but if you think that our job as entrepreneurs is to fix what sucks, and once we have freedom in terms of legal structure and community and really how to organize the human side, I'm actually really optimistic and excited about great people who are able to deliver really high-quality interpersonal experiences. Going wild with, what if from the moment you wake up until the moment you go to bed, people are making money by giving you the best quality of life possible. And of course, not just you individually, but I want a world where 7 billion human beings are working all the time to create better, more beautiful experiences for each other. And I think if we'll have the freedom, culturally and legally, and most importantly, we can create a world where that's how entrepreneurship works.
Let me ask you a question. So, about your students, or students like yours who have gone through programs like yours, who, who grow up as adults with more agency, more ability to connect, more ability to think. How do they fit into institutions which do not reflect those sentiments, abilities, the hero's path? It's like, a lot of the institutions we have today are, using your language, like anti-hero, anti-human, anti-thinking. So what happens when they grow up into these institutions?
Now, that's a great question. I'll start with a fairly banal example. When I was back in high school and college, I worked in restaurants. And there were some restaurants that were really fun, cool environments where we talk and laugh as we were working our asses off. There were other environments at restaurants that were horrible and hierarchical, and the waiters treated the busboys like crap, and the head cooks treated the line cooks like crap, and the dishwasher was the bottom of the barrel. So regardless of the institution, there are healthy versions of the sick versions. One of the reasons I'm very passionate about conscious capitalism is conscious capitalism is a network of entrepreneurs and corporate leaders that are absolutely committed to creating healthier, better places to work in. So, I think a lot of people are willing to accept the institutions around them, but everything great, Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak started in a garage, now Apple's most successful corporation on earth. We have to criticize by creating. If there are institutions that suck, stay away from them. They will die. Meanwhile, one of the great things about the internet is those of us who care about relationships or inspiration or imagination or courage or integrity or whatever it is, we can find each other, we can work together, we can set up networks, we can meet in person, we can create schools, we can create free cities, we can create new living environments, new retail environments. I see a rapidly growing world of people separating from the garbage of the past and creating a better world. And so mostly, when I see people embedded in the old world, this is why I created Original Path. I want to give them as many paths out as possible, because the interesting thing, I travel and speak around the world. there is a great entrepreneurial subculture in the U.S. with Austin and San Francisco, Brooklyn, some of the headquarters. But I've been in Guatemala. I've been in the Soviet Union, Moscow, or former Soviet Union. Thank God it's Russia now. And even in Moscow, which is one of the dreariest, ugliest, most horrible places, there's a small cohort of very creative entrepreneurial people that are creating better lives for themselves even there. So I think there's a global culture of sometimes digital nomads, entrepreneurs, creative professionals, human potential movement types, whatever it is. And we are, in all cultures around the world, finding each other and building better institutions. The faster we do that, the less of that other exists.
Beautiful. No, I that's all really great, and I'm also really excited for our future and optimistic.
Any other questions?
No, I'm endlessly optimistic, and one of the things is too is if you're working on projects where you can make a difference, even if it's hard. And the Free City thing has taken a decade, and going at the pace of government. The school project, it's like getting punched in the gut every day. To any entrepreneurship, it's not easy. There's all this romantic, idealistic language, and the fact is you're solving difficult problems. Sometimes funding issues, people get angry, things don't work out, but you solve problems. And if you solve problems, moving in a direction towards something you believe in, that actually becomes a fun life. I'm at the point where most problems I enjoy solving. Occasionally there's one that's not fun, but most of the time you get in a place where I'd much rather be solving problems, going towards something I care about, than sitting in a cubicle at a job I don't believe in.
No, I think we're all kind of slowly moving towards that as well.
From your lips to God's ears. Maybe so. Well, Michael,
Absolutely.
thank you for joining us in this conversation. We've enjoyed chatting with you. Let's not wait another decade to have you back on and continue the conversation, because you actually mentioned probably about a half a dozen projects that you have worked on, you are working on. You'll have a dozen more within the next 10 days, I'm sure. So there'll be plenty of opportunities for us to continue this conversation about the bright future that you're helping to create for us. Thank you, Michael.
Absolutely. You're most welcome. It's a delight to be on, and happy to be back whenever it works for you guys.
Awesome.
Great to see you guys.
Take care.
Take care.
Bye-bye.